Arben's methods were cold and meticulous, a stark contrast to Declan's more aggressive, confrontational style. He kept his crew disciplined, instructing them to strike only when the timing was perfect, when the damage would be most humiliating. The first major confrontation came when Declan's scene spotted a shipment labeled with an unfamiliar Albanian insignia. and reinforcing the message that they were willing to defend their territory without hesitation. Baltimore's waterfront had become a powder keg. Each shipment, each dockside conversation, each glance between crews held the potential to ignite violence. Workers lived in constant anxiety, knowing that even a small mistake could bring devastation. The war between Declan O'Reilly and Arben Kodra had moved beyond mere business rivalry. It was now personal, calculated, and relentless. The docks, which had once symbolized opportunity and trade, now resonated with tension, fear, and the quiet promise of bloodshed. Every move, every decision carried weight, and both crews knew that the next encounter could change the balance of power forever. By the time Chapter 3 unfolded, the docks of Baltimore had transformed into a battlefield of strategy, suspicion, and constant danger. Declan O'Reilly realized that brute force alone would no longer secure his dominance. A failed raid against Arben Kodra had exposed vulnerabilities in his operations, and he knew that the Albanians were not just skilled but patient, willing to wait for the perfect moment to strike. Declan's response was decisive. He began recruiting outsiders, street fighters who had no ties to the existing gangs, and even a few former mercenaries who had seen combat overseas. These new recruits brought unpredictability, and Declan understood that unpredictability could be a weapon. The Liverpool crew began training in abandoned warehouses, preparing for raids that required precision and timing. Each operation was meticulously planned, from ambushes on small shipments to coordinated surveillance of key docks. Declan instructed his men to gather intelligence, follow targets, and map every route Arben's crew might take. Morale was high within the Liverpool faction. The promise of confrontation and potential victory over the Albanians gave them a sense of purpose and fearlessness. Yet beneath the confidence, a quiet tension simmered. Any mistake could end in death. And Declan knew the Albanians would not forgive errors. Arben Kodra, meanwhile, remained almost invisible. He worked like a shadow, moving through the city's underworld with a network of informants and loyal enforcers. He intercepted messages, bribed dock officials, and spread misinformation about Declan's intentions. While the Liverpool gang prepared for open conflict, Arben was constructing traps and sowing distrust within their ranks. Declan's crew began noticing minor sabotage, equipment missing, crates tampered with, and information leaking in unexpected ways. Suspicion grew, and loyalty fractured as paranoia took hold. Declan, however, remained calm, using the paranoia to test his crew, rewarding those who stayed vigilant and punishing those who faltered. The first serious clash came when Declan attempted to seize a shipment of imported spirits that the Albanians had quietly redirected. The Liverpool gang struck quickly, moving under cover of night, only to find that the crates had been replaced with empty boxes, a setup that left them vulnerable to a counterstrike. Arben's men, lying in wait, forced Declan's crew into a chaotic retreat. Shots rang out in the darkness, echoing across the harbor, and the sound carried fear to the dockworkers and small-time operators nearby. Declan narrowly escaped, furious but alive, and the failure forced him to rethink his strategy. This confrontation marked a turning point. Both gangs now understood that the war was no longer about individual shipments or territory alone. It had become a psychological battle. Each side probed weaknesses, exploited errors, and anticipated moves with deadly precision. The docks had become more than a workplace. They were a chessboard, with Declan and Arben as rival grandmasters. Everyone who worked near the waterfront had to navigate a new reality where alliances could shift overnight. Danger lurked in every shadow, and the cost of a misstep could be fatal. The war was intensifying, and Baltimore itself was being reshaped by the clash of Liverpool's aggression and Albanian cunning. The war on Baltimore's docks grew more vicious as Arben Kodra began striking with precision that shook Declan O'Reilly's crew to its core. Unlike Declan, who thrived on confrontation and aggression, Arben's methods were calculated and surgical. He targeted key lieutenants, men whom Declan had trusted for years, cutting the leadership of the Liverpool gang and leaving confusion in his wake. One night, a warehouse filled with shipping crates was set ablaze. The fire destroyed not only the goods inside, but also the sense of security Declan had tried to instill among his men. Panic spread, and even the most loyal fighters began to doubt their safety. Declan realized that fear, wielded strategically, could be as devastating as any gun. Arben's attacks were not random. They were carefully choreographed to destabilize Declan's organization. While Declan focused on force and retaliation, Arben exploited his weaknesses, feeding misinformation and orchestrating betrayals from within. Men who had once pledged loyalty to Liverpool were found conspiring with the Albanians, motivated by fear, greed, or revenge. Declan's paranoia grew with each passing day. He began questioning the loyalty of even his closest advisors, wondering who might be feeding Arben details of their movements. The docks, once bustling with routine commerce, now pulsed with tension, each shipment carrying the threat of ambush. Meanwhile, Arben quietly expanded his operations. He secured more warehouses, bribed officials to smooth the movement of his goods, and began smuggling rare commodities that attracted attention from outside criminal networks. These operations were highly organized and shielded from sight, allowing the Albanian Mafia to gain an economic advantage over the Liverpool crew without immediately revealing their hand. Declan, sensing the growing threat, ordered reconnaissance missions to gather intelligence, but Arben's network proved elusive. Every attempt to track Albanian movements was met with misdirection, leaving Declan frustrated and forced to rely on intuition rather than facts. The psychological toll on the Liverpool gang was immense. Men who had once been fearless in the face of confrontation now hesitated, watching every shadow and second-guessing every order. Declan's leadership was tested as he tried to restore confidence while planning counterattacks. He realized that a direct assault might be too risky. Arben's strategy of strikes and psychological warfare had left his organization vulnerable to collapse from within. Declan began training his crew in patience, stealth, and deception, hoping that by learning to move like the Albanians, they could regain the advantage. Even as the tension built, the stakes escalated beyond mere shipments and profit. Both gangs understood that any confrontation could have deadly consequences. Every move became a gamble with lives on the line, and the city itself was caught in the crossfire. Dock workers avoided the waterfront. Businesses hesitated to ship goods through the port, and whispers of the gang war spread through Baltimore. Declan knew that to survive, he would need more than brute strength. He would need cunning, strategy, and the ability to anticipate Arben's next move. The war had evolved from territorial disputes into a deadly game of wits, with the docks as the board, and Baltimore itself as the backdrop for a conflict that was only intensifying with each passing day. Declan O'Reilly's frustration reached its peak as the Liverpool crew struggled under the constant pressure of Arben Kodra's calculated attacks. Morale was low, resources were dwindling, and fear had seeped into every corner of the docks. Then came the discovery that would change everything. A traitor within Declan's inner circle had been feeding information to the Albanians. The revelation struck like lightning, igniting anger, paranoia, and a relentless thirst for revenge. Declan realized that this betrayal was not just a personal affront. It was the key to turning the tides of war. If he could use the traitor to his advantage, he could hit Arben where it hurt most. Careful planning began immediately. Declan studied Arben's operations, mapping the Albanian movements, noting their predictable patterns, and observing the subtle signs of their logistics. Using the traitor as a channel, he fed false information about a lucrative shipment arriving at the harbor, a bait designed to draw Arben's men into a trap. Every detail was scrutinized: timing, guard rotations, escape routes, and potential reinforcements. Declan's men were trained to execute with precision. Failure was not an option. The entire operation was a gamble, and the slightest misstep could end with both sides in flames and Declan's empire in ruins. The night of the ambush arrived. Baltimore's docks were eerily silent, fog rolling in from the harbor, shrouding the warehouses in mist. Declan's crew moved like shadows, blending with the darkness, weapons ready, nerves taut. They positioned themselves strategically along the piers, hidden behind stacks of crates and containers. The trap was set with meticulous care, and the sense of anticipation was electric. When the Albanians arrived, confident and unaware, Declan's crew struck. Chaos erupted instantly. Gunfire echoed across the water. Crates toppled, and the clash of two ruthless forces sent shockwaves through the harbor. Bodies fell, alliances shattered, and even minor participants in the fight were caught in the violence. Declan moved among his men, coordinating strikes, covering retreats, and ensuring that the trap worked as planned. The Albanians, though caught off guard, reacted quickly, forcing the engagement into a deadly stalemate. The docks, once a symbol of commerce and trade, had become a battlefield littered with debris, the metallic scent of gunpowder mixing with smoke and salt water. Declan realized that while the ambush had been partially successful, Arben's men were not easily defeated. Their discipline and organization made every victory costly. By dawn, the aftermath was evident. Both crews were bloodied and shaken, but Declan had gained a psychological edge. He had shown that he could adapt, anticipate, and strike with intelligence as well as force. Arben, though temporarily set back, would not forget the ambush, and the cycle of retaliation had only begun. The docks were scarred, the workers terrified, and the city itself had become a silent witness to the escalating war. Declan knew that the coming days would test his limits even further. He had drawn blood and exacted revenge, but the war against Arben Kodra was far from over. The battle for control of Baltimore's waterfront had entered a new, even deadlier phase. Declan O'Reilly had hoped that the ambush would give him the upper hand, but Arben Kodra's response was swift and ruthless. The Albanians had learned quickly from their losses and understood that Declan's greatest vulnerability wasn't his crew, it was the people they cared about. One night, Arben's men struck where it hurt most. The families of key Liverpool gang members were threatened, homes vandalized, and messages of warning left in plain sight. Panic swept through Declan's ranks. Men who had once fought with fearless loyalty now hesitated, distracted by the fear for their loved ones. Declan felt the weight of responsibility heavier than ever. The war was no longer contained to the docks. It had invaded personal lives, leaving no room for hesitation. Declan knew he had to act decisively. Retreat was not an option, and showing weakness could destroy the morale of his crew. He devised a plan to strike back at Arben, his most valuable asset. A heavily guarded warehouse on the edge of the harbor where millions of dollars in cash, illegal goods, and sensitive documents were stored. This operation required precision, timing, and nerves of steel. Declan spent days observing the location, noting guard rotations, security cameras, and patrol routes. Every detail was critical. Every misstep could mean death. The Liverpool crew trained relentlessly, rehearsing entry points, cover strategies, and extraction routes. Declan made it clear that this was not just about money, it was about sending a message that no threat, no matter how personal or ruthless, could intimidate them. As the day of the operation approached, tension among Declan's men reached a boiling point. The air was thick with anticipation and fear. Each member knew that the raid could end in disaster. They moved quietly under the cover of darkness, shadows slipping between containers and warehouses. Declan himself led the assault, directing his crew with sharp gestures, his eyes scanning for any sign of Arben's men. The ambush was carefully orchestrated. Simultaneous entry points, rapid neutralization of guards, and swift collection of valuable goods. The first wave of confrontation was brutal. Shots rang out, glass shattered, and chaos reigned within the warehouse walls. Despite the intensity, Declan's meticulous planning began to pay off. His crew moved efficiently, covering each other, neutralizing threats, and securing the high-value targets. Yet Arben's men were disciplined and well-prepared, forcing every Liverpool fighter to stay alert, improvising in moments of unexpected resistance. The warehouse became a maze of fire, smoke, and shouting, a dangerous dance between two highly trained criminal organizations. The raid was successful but costly. Injuries mounted, and Declan's crew knew that retaliation from Arben would be swift and unforgiving. By dawn, the operation had ended, leaving the warehouse partially destroyed and both gangs bloodied and exhausted. The message had been delivered. Declan O'Reilly's crew could strike boldly, even against the most fortified positions. Yet the war was far from over. Arben Kodra, enraged by the audacity of the raid, began planning his next move. The cycle of attack and counterattack was intensifying, and Baltimore itself had become a city under siege. The battle for control of the docks had escalated to a personal vendetta, one that would test loyalty, courage, and the limits of survival for both sides. The final confrontation between Declan O'Reilly and Arben Kodra had been coming for weeks, a storm that neither side could avoid. Both gangs had been battered, bloodied, and tested beyond endurance, yet neither was willing to surrender. Baltimore's docks were eerily quiet in the early hours, a false calm that hid the tension crackling in the air. Declan's crew moved with disciplined urgency, weapons loaded and plans memorized, shadows slipping between containers as they prepared to confront Arben's men head-on. Every step was measured, every glance calculated, for this was no longer about territory or shipments. It was a battle for survival, pride, and ultimate dominance. Arben had anticipated the Liverpool strike. His men were positioned strategically, armed with precision, and ready to respond to any intrusion. Surveillance cameras and lookout points had been manned for hours, and backup units were hidden in the maze of warehouses and shipping containers. The Albania's discipline contrasted sharply with Declan's more aggressive, chaotic approach, but both sides shared the same deadly determination. The docks, once a place of commerce and labor, had become a war zone, every corner a potential trap, every shadow hiding lethal intent. The clash erupted with explosive force. Gunfire shattered the early morning silence, echoing across the harbor and drawing frightened dockworkers to safety. Crates toppled, sparks flew from metal collisions, and the air was thick with smoke and the metallic tongue of blood. Declan's crew fought with desperation, knowing that retreat was not an option. They moved with practiced aggression, targeting key Albanian positions and trying to gain ground. But Arben's men countered with disciplined precision, forcing the Liverpool fighters into chaos. The battle was not just physical, it was psychological, with each side testing the other's nerves and endurance. Amid the chaos, alliances fractured. Men who had fought together for years hesitated or retreated, unable to cope with the ferocity of the confrontation. The Albanians exploited these moments, striking quickly and efficiently, while Declan personally coordinated his remaining loyal fighters, covering flanks, securing critical pathways, and ensuring that every move counted. The docks became a labyrinth of violence, filled with smoke, shattered crates, and the cries of the wounded. Every second was a life-or-death gamble, and the stakes could not have been higher. By the time federal authorities arrived, the aftermath was devastating. Both crews were severely depleted, bloodied, and shaken. Declan barely escaped with his life, slipping into the shadows as the Albanians retreated strategically, disappearing into the city's underworld. The docks bore the marks of battle, burned warehouses, bullet-riddled containers, and the lingering tension of a war that had consumed everything in its path. Baltimore, a city unaccustomed to such ferocity on its waterfront, was left reeling from the carnage. The confrontation had settled nothing. Both Declan and Arben had survived, but the city had changed irrevocably. The docks, once a hub of trade and livelihood, now stood as a testament to ambition, vengeance, and bloodshed. The battle between Liverpool and the Albanian Mafia had reached a climax, yet the war's echoes would continue to shape the lives of those who had witnessed it firsthand. The fight for dominance had left scars, and Baltimore's waterfront would never be the same again. As smoke had barely cleared from the docks when the full weight of the battle became apparent. Warehouses were burned, containers lay in twisted heaps, and the water near the piers was stained with oil and blood. Baltimore had survived the storm, but the city's waterfront would never be the same. Declan O'Reilly, battered and exhausted, retreated into the shadows, his mind racing with the cost of survival. His crew was fractured, some lost to the fight, others too fearful to continue. The streets whispered of the Liverpool gang's rise and near collapse, and Declan understood that every move from now on would require extreme caution. He had won the fight in terms of survival, but the war for dominance was far from over. Arben Kodra had vanished as quietly as he had arrived, his reputation unscathed despite the chaos. The Albanian Mafia had endured, their organization resilient, and their influence had seeped deeper into the city's underworld. Arben's strategy had always been calculated. Even when blood flowed across the docks, he ensured that his men suffered minimal losses. The raid on the warehouse, though a blow to their resources, had only strengthened the Albania's resolve. Arben sent subtle messages through intermediaries, reminding Baltimore that his presence remained a threat, a shadow that could strike again at any moment. Declan, meanwhile, faced the harsh reality of rebuilding. He moved cautiously, hiding from law enforcement and rival crews alike. His operations were scaled down, focused on survival rather than conquest. The docks, once a symbol of his power and ambition, now felt like a trap, each corner a reminder of lives lost and opportunities squandered. Yet despite the losses, Declan retained a spark of determination. He began planning quietly, not for immediate revenge, but for the day when he could reclaim his authority. The Albanians had won the battle, but Declan knew the war was far from finished. The city itself bore witness to the aftermath. Businesses had closed temporarily, fearful of violence spilling into the streets. Dock workers who had survived the firefight spoke in hushed tones about the chaos, terrified to return to a place where lawlessness had prevailed. Neighborhoods near the harbor felt the tension in the air, and even those who had no connection to the gangs sensed that Baltimore had been transformed by blood and ambition. The docks were no longer merely a place of trade, they had become a symbol of the cost of power, where ambition and ruthlessness could leave permanent scars. In the quiet that followed, the story of Liverpool versus the Albanian Mafia became a legend whispered among the city's underworld. It was a cautionary tale of loyalty, betrayal, and the fine line between control and destruction. Declan O'Reilly had survived, but at tremendous cost, and Arben Kodra remained a looming, unseen force. The docks stood as a silent monument to the war that had raged across them, a war that would haunt Baltimore for years. Lives had been changed irrevocably, alliances broken, and the city reminded that when ambition meets ruthlessness, the consequences are measured not in victory alone, but in blood, fear, and survival.